Okay. So welcome to our fall 2020 update. Today we're going to talk a little bit about discipline and section 504. It's exciting, I know. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of the Enrich updates. I had sent you all an email about some updates to our universal program. We're going to talk a little bit about discipline and some requirements, the virtual sign-in, some reminders, and do a little pulse check. And then, of course, I always have time for questions and answers at the end. So as we are doing some of these, we have tried to spice up how we start them. So at this point, you could unmute or put in your chat, but it's kind of fun to get to know each other a little bit. So what was your favorite TV show as a child? Y'all can unmute or type it in the chat. Bonanza, Full House. Stephanie, I'm with you on Full House. I was watching it, I think it was this early this morning. Full House was a good show, I agree. Yes, Michelle, we know you're old. At least it wasn't like Captain Kangaroo. Oh, Who's the Boss? That's another good one, Lori. Growing Pains, yeah. Oh, Rugrats, lots of Nickelodeon. Yeah, I used to watch that with my daughter. Growing Pains was a great show too. Dexter's Lab, yes, Growing Pains was good. We all agree with Growing Pains there, Lindsay. He-Man. Kimberly, you're killing me. I was a big Smurf fan too. I like the Smurfs. I like Smurfette. They were kind of fun. And Tom and Jerry. Oh, I got another person while we're talking about this. Saved by the Bell. Hey, yeah, Stephanie, you hear they're like redoing that? Lori, I agree. Nothing like Saturday morning cartoons and getting up and eating your cereal in front of those. Good times, good times. I know, I can't wait, Stephanie, either. It should be good. Okay. Well, we got somebody else coming in here. Y'all who are just joining us, we're kind of putting in the chat what our favorite TV show as a child was. We've had things like Bonanza, Growing Pains, Saved by the Bell, Saturday morning cartoons. Good stuff. Okay. Well, we appreciate you enjoying that little fun. So let's move on. Oops, too far. So let's talk a little bit about the Enrich updates, the information that I had sent out to everybody, I think it was last week, on some updates that you'll see in the program. Our system has not been updated yet. I just checked, they've not done ours. So as soon as they do, I'll let you know. But just to go over really quickly, so in the referral, they added some data, some other data and outcomes of no response. They changed some of the wording on the consent to evaluate, specifically the reeval. It now says to determine continued eligibility. They did do some clarifying words in the eligibility determination. In the actual 504 itself, they added the ACT and SAT, and they also added that contingency plan. So just like those of you who are working through the IEP system, we do have a contingency plan for school closures or shutdowns. So in your 504 meetings from now on, just like if you remember, if you were with us last spring, when all of this happened, we asked you to call parents, even on the 504s, to talk about what the accommodations and things would look like during the shutdown. Well, now they've added that contingency plan for shutdowns. However, all of these changes will not show until you're opening a new 504 plan. So if you have one currently in there and it's in the new version, you're still not going to see all this stuff until you go to do an annual review, okay? The conference summary, they did add signatures to the, if you're doing the summary as an add action, as opposed to the one embedded in the 504. They added the student invite and the single meeting notice. They changed some wording in the acknowledgement form. They added a space for additional comments in the teacher input. For the BIP, they added some outcomes and wording. Program, they added additional exit reasons. And then electronic signatures, they were added to documents, but again, ours is not updated. So it will give you the option when you have that says, just like an IEP, will these documents be signed virtually? I think it's along the lines of what it says. But remember, you're not going to see these updates until you do a new 504. Just some things to remember. Make sure you're working collaboratively with your school special education coordinator. When students are eligible under IDA and dismissed, a 504 committee needs to consider if they're eligible under 504. Other things to remember is just because a doctor writes a note doesn't mean the student automatically qualifies. There still has to be that impact in the classroom. Really important, we've been getting a lot of emails here recently. Be very diligent when looking at the students. Many parents appear to be requesting 504s given our COVID situation. So again, we don't want to give a 504 just because of COVID and instruction that may or may not have occurred. So keep that in mind when you're looking at these children becoming eligible. And then, like I said, once the system is updated with the changes in the universal platform, I will let you know, but keep working on switching those over from V1. Michelle, to answer your question, wasn't there an issue with the signatures? You only somewhat hallucinated that. The state has deactivated the collaboration portal right now because there were some security issues with that, but virtual signatures have continued. Just that collaboration portal is no longer. So just a few reminders, and just want to quickly go through some discipline information. So if you could just put in the chat box, so what is your comfort zone regarding discipline in 504? So let's go from a 1 to 10. 10 feeling like you're an expert on it, and a 1 feeling like I got nothing. Michelle tells us she's a 10. Kimberly's a 5, Yvette's an 8. These are pretty good numbers. You guys are feeling fairly confident about discipline in 504. I like it. So we're all looking like we're anywhere from a 5 to a 10. Nobody's really said 1 or 2. So it's looking, for the most part, you guys are feeling fairly confident about discipline in the 504. So let's talk a little bit about it. So remember, a short-term disciplinary removal, that is defined as a removal from the normal educational setting due to disciplinary reasons for less than 10 consecutive school days, right? So this is less than 10 days. Keep in mind too, y'all, this could be if you're removing them from the virtual environment. So if you have students that have chosen that online setting and there are issues with the students in that setting and you are removing them, that is considered suspension even though they're virtual, right? That removal is typically determined by administration. ISS may not be a short-term removal if work assistance and the 504 plan services are provided. So the best practice is to document when, how long, and who provides this. So even if we have a student in ISS that has a 504, if those accommodations and those things are provided, then it's really not a short-term removal because they're still receiving that. So examples of OSS or out of school suspension is we call the parent to pick them up for the remainder of the day due to behavior or other situations. Maybe it's the last hour of the day, maybe it's the last 4 hours of the day. Just remember, anytime we keep a child from school, whether it's for an hour or 30 minutes or for the entire day, it is considered a full day suspension. There are no partial suspensions. Students don't get suspended for 0.25 of the day. So if a student is suspended due to disciplinary, then that has to be coded in PowerSchool appropriately. Okay, anything partial part of a day will be counted as a day. So keep in mind also, administrators are given those 10 free short-term removal days for each school year. Free does not mean there's no cost, but what it means is there's no MDR or manifestation that has to happen. No services or no 504 procedural safeguards. So anything from below 10 days, you don't have to do any of those things. These days, keep in mind, follow a student from school to school or district to district. It's not reset. So if we have a student that moves into your school that has a 504 and has 8 days of suspension, that timeline or those days of suspension do not start over just because they're in a new school. Those 8 days carry to your school. So keep that in mind. So the long-term disciplinary removals are any of those removals that are over 10 consecutive days. Typically, we see those more for serious offense. We may be looking at an IAE, an expulsion, something like that. This is usually when we have, maybe one of the violations in the top 3, which is seriously bodily injury, drugs, or a weapon. When we're looking at a disciplinary removal over 10 days, typically an MDR is going to be held, or an MDR actually, not typically, an MDR is required because it's going to be a change in placement, whether it's to an IAES or it's to homebound or what have you. The team must review all of that information and the relationship between the disability and the behavior. So again, even though we're not talking an IEP student where they have one of the 13 identified disabilities, you still, as a 504 team, need to look at what that disability or that life function, limiting life function was, and how that behavior is related to that or not. So this is very much along the lines of the IEP. So prior to the long-term removal, so you as 504 committees can take proactive measures to avoid them. You should meet prior to accumulating 10 days and put in supports, such as SEL supports, our tiered intervention, your MTSS, your RTI for behavioral supports. Do an FBA and develop a behavior intervention plan through that reeval. Amend the 504 plan. Maybe even refer to special ed, but ensure additional supports have been implemented. All of these documents are within the 504, the Universal Program now, so you should have no problem accessing the documents that you need to complete these. But we just can't have a student who's suspended for more than 10 days and then come to find out that nothing has been done, nobody's ever met on this team or on this child or things like that. So behavior supports on support services and our website is under performance gaps, and there's the link. You want to make sure you collect that informational data and make those decisions. Collaborate with that staff, your interventionists, your special education, your administrators, your teachers, your counselors, if you have an SRO, your SRO, whoever handles behavior, you want to make sure that you are collaborating with. So here's another pulse check. Does your school have a process for communicating removals? Proactively looking at behavior supports? Give me a little yes or no in the chat box. Yes, yes. I got a sure. I don't know, Kimberly, if that's a sure like you think you do or a yeah, you do. Does anyone want to unmute themselves and share what your school's process is? So how do you, as the 504 person, or even, know about these removals and what the process is? I would love it if somebody would share.
I'll go ahead and share.
Okay, great.
So,
Hi, Yvette. Yvette.
hey, so it kind of benefits that I also have experience handling behavior as the AP, but we have a scholar support team where it's our social worker on our campus, our dean of culture, our behavior coach, and we all go through any needs, which is behavior, social, emotional, anything that a child may have, including things like suspensions or referrals. And so that's a daily touch point, but a weekly meeting amongst that team on our campus.
Very nice. Anybody else want to share what they do? So you all should have some sort of process because you would have put it in your 504 policies and procedures. But what are things that you all are doing, especially now given COVID and that a lot of our schools are virtual? I mean, Michelle, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about what you all do normally virtually with behavior.
Well, one of the positives of being virtual is we don't have a lot of it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we really don't have a whole lot of behavior issues with our kids. But when we do, we've only had a couple, and none of them have ever been with a student with a disability. But when we do, we immediately call together a team who are involved with that kid, the school counselor, the teacher, usually me, and we look at the behaviors and kind of go from there. We have never actually suspended a kid from school except for once, and that was because she was constantly making inappropriate comments to her teachers.
Mm-hmm.
And as it turned out, she was doing it on purpose to get removed from school. So the parent ended up, withdrawing her and putting her back in her local school. But we immediately get together the team working with that student and kind of look and see why it's happening. What can we do to help that student understand what positive behavior is, what acceptable behavior is. And we actually do have an in-school suspension, but it's actually an additional class. We never remove them from their regular curriculum, but we do put them in a class where they have to do their work at a certain time with that teacher monitoring it. So as opposed to the regular kids who can do it any time they want to. So we just kind of remove the choice of when to do your work from them.
And I think, I know I sent out a webinar that the state did on behavior, especially during this virtual time. It's got some really great information. Are you all, and again, if you want to unmute or just put in the chat box, finding that your students virtually are still having behavior issues, or is that going really well? Or are things you're really struggling with that?
I think for us, and I'm new at Polaris Tech, but I think for us, we don't have many behaviors. Matter of fact, I think like 0 behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm also finding that things that we thought were a struggle on IEPs seem like not to be as much of a struggle for our learners. So, things are just some eye-opening things are happening. And I don't know if it's because they're home and they don't have as many distractions as they would have had if they were at school, in the school. But, it's kind of hard to write IEPs when the students are not here, or even, write plans because they're home. But we are doing great communication, actually. We have meetings on Wednesdays. We staff our middle and our high, and we have our teacher leaders who kind of talk about, behaviors, but there's no behaviors. The most thing is, coming to coming to virtual classes. I think that's the biggest thing that we see. So nothing negative, but that could be perceived as a negative because it's adversely affecting their academics in school.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, as you all know, I'm finishing up this lovely PhD in this dissertation, and my dissertation actually is on online schools. And one of the behaviors that was noted throughout all of my research and even talking with folks was that the biggest behavior issue is just kids attending. So in the online world, just like Michelle said, there's not a lot of significant behaviors like we see when everybody's back into school face to face. So just to review a little bit about the MDR meeting, remember, if that MDR is required, just like with IDA, the 504 committee must meet no more than 10 days from the incident triggering the long-term removal. Now that is 10 calendar days, right? So you have to meet no more than 10 days from that incident. The parents, the guardians, adult students for most of you must be notified in writing of the MDR and the reason for the MDR prior to that meeting happening. Reasons allowed are that we're going over 10 days of suspension or that the school is recommending an expulsion. Those are the two reasons why you're going to do an MDR. You're going to go over 10 days or you're recommending expulsion. In the past, we've seen schools at day 5 say, hey, let's do an MDR because we're getting close to 10 days. No, you only do it when you hit day 11, okay? If the 504 committee determines the behavior is related to the disability, then that means the long-term removal cannot occur, just like with an IEP. So if the reason for the behavior was deemed through the MDR due to the student's disability, then we cannot keep that student out. We have to bring them back, even if the offense is mandatory under state law or that zero tolerance policy, okay? So I'm gonna say that again. If your MDR through your 504 committee determines the behavior is related to the disability, that long-term removal cannot occur, even if it's mandatory or under the state law. So Michelle's question is, does it have the implementation reason like the IEP, like did not implement the 504? I guess you're asking if the reason is because the team didn't follow the 504, then yeah, that would still be a reason that the student cannot be in that long-term exposure or that long-term placement. So some questions to consider at the MDR. Was the conduct caused by or have a direct and substantial relationship to the child's disability? So if you have a student, let's say, that has a 504 because of, I don't know, think of something else, diabetes, and they decided they were going to bring a knife to school, I wouldn't see the connection for those two. But if you have a student who has ADHD and has a 504 only for accommodations, and maybe brings a knife to school or some sort of other weapon, that would be hard to justify based on their lack of impulse control. This is like wild examples, I'm just saying. And then here's your question, Michelle. Did the school fail to comply or implement that 504 plan? So were those accommodations not happening? Is it the school, were they not being followed? If either is yes, so if it's either because of the child's disability or because it was not implemented, then yes, it is a manifestation of their disability. If they're no, then it's not a manifestation of their disability. Does that answer your question, Michelle? Yep, good. So just to be clear again, if either one of these reasons, if it was because it was the conduct was due to a direct and substantial relationship to their disability, or if the 504 plan was not implemented, then yes, it is a manifestation. Either one of them. It doesn't have to be both, but it could be one. If they're no, now here they would have to both be no, then it would not be a manifestation. and that extended or long-term placement could continue. Everything, as you know, the documents, the process, and everything are in Enrich. So keep in mind too, an MDR is not specifically addressed in Section 504 regulations, right? I use my line that Susan likes to quote too, 504 is clear as mud. But what we do is we always revert back to IDA. By reverting back to IDA, we know that we are all protected and we are doing the right things for our students by following those laws. A reevaluation is, though, inexplicitly stated. The MDR process is viewed as the reevaluation because it requires that data collection from various sources. So even though the regulations do not specifically say an MDR, it is viewed as that reeval. So as you're doing this, because you're looking at everything, it becomes a part of that. Again, some of those sources of documents are behaviors, report, witness statements, evaluation, things like that. Impulsivity argument, like in my probably fairly poor examples a few minutes ago, is commonly raised by families and must be considered, right? So we have a lot of those impulsivity, ADD, ADHD. In discussing it, make sure there is enough data or facts used in this discussion. Again, this is where your data and all of your information is going to be very helpful. It is the responsibility of the 504 committees for considering the data which was known or should have been known. So for example, if we get a report from an outside psychologist or evaluation or something that a parent provides you, and then all of a sudden Johnny has his behavior incident, then we knew that there was something that could potentially cause this. So you want to make sure when you get that information, you all are meeting as 504 teams immediately and reviewing any documents that come about. So some of the differences between IDA and Section 504. Section 504 requirements differ from IDA regarding weapons, drug, alcohol, and seriously bodily harm. IDA allows for that interim alternative educational setting for one of the, what we call the big three. Section 504 doesn't require this, right? And the administrative discretion of up to 45 days does not apply. So 504 doesn't require any of that IAES or any of that 45-day. It is really up to the administrators to decide. Drug or alcohol, a student with a drug or alcohol can be expelled under 504, even if it's a manifestation of the disability. Remember, drug and alcohol addictions, abuse are not limiting life function and not a reason for eligibility under a 504. If a student under 504 is expelled, you do not have any requirement to offer educational services during that time. A 504 does not typically require or call for direct instruction, but they are general education students at that time. Well, they're general education students all the time. And unlike students with IEPs, when they are expelled, we do have an obligation to continue with their special education services. So just some final things to keep in mind. Protections under 504 are available to all eligible students with or without a 504. Make sure you have a process for tracking these students in disciplinary action. The protections does not condone or excuse a student's behavior. And make sure those procedural safeguards, parental rights must be given in writing to the parents, at least annual, and also when an MDR is going to occur. So I know that was quick and this was recorded, but again, what is your comfort zone regarding discipline in 504? Do you feel like you all know a little bit more? You have a better understanding? This was a really good quick review of it. Yes, thank you, Lindsay. This gave we just really wanted to give a reminder about discipline. Again, we're not seeing, obviously our discipline numbers have gone down. Given COVID and all that, and we might see a huge rise when everybody goes back face to face 5 days a week, which I don't know when that is. Carla, I agree. A more concrete plan, a school-wide understanding of this would be great. You know, we will post this. You are welcome to share this with anybody that you feel needs it. So make sure you sign in the virtual link to make sure you get credit, and you watch it, either you've watched it now or you've watched it live. And the other thing we want to know is, what are some future trainings you would like to see regarding 504? You know, what are some things you guys want to see happening or for us to really focus on? And if you want to unmute or put in the chat, that would be great. I'm actually going to stop recording at this point, and I'll